The Skillman Foundation, Tonya Allen. President and Chief Executive Officer for The Right Place, Birgit Klohs. President and Chief Executive Officer for Consumers Energy and CMS Energy, Patti Poppe. Chairwoman and Chief Executive Officer for Siebert Cisneros, Shank and Company, LLC, Suzanne Shank. And to moderate the discussion, political reporter for WOOD TV, Rick Albin.
Have a seat. Well, welcome, and I want to tell you how excited I am to do this panel because this is talking about the whole essence of this conference. Are we prepared? We know that we've seen times in Michigan where we were surprised by things that went south economically, and they had long and devastating impacts on the state. Now here we are, most people would suggest, in one of the better economic situations that we have seen for a couple of decades. And that's about the period of time that I've been in the state. And I frankly am not enamored by what I have seen as the roller coaster type economy that we've seen. So in my mind, part of being prepared is being prepared for those unknowns, for those things out there. So if you have a good foundation, you can sustain some of that economic turmoil. So we're going to start with a story that Birgit told backstage, and I think this is fascinating. When you talk about economic development, what's the bedrock?
Well, the bedrock is really three things: workforce, talent, infrastructure, and quality of life. Okay, those are the bedrocks. Now, recently, the CEOs of the country are being polled, and the three top site location factors are talent, infrastructure, and incentives. Taxes are number 7. So everybody always gets excited about the taxes, and are they too high, are they too low? Business really factors that in from the very beginning. Talent, infrastructure, and incentives are the top 3. Simple.
Let's start in that order. Let's talk about talent. And Patti, I know you and I talked yesterday about a particular talent program that you have been involved in that involves, for lack of better words, mentoring and trying to even share talent, right?
Yeah, we discovered at Consumers, we had a program for gas, we had 100 openings for gas distribution workers. 100 openings, we received 4,000 applicants for those 100 positions. We were thrilled. We thought, okay, less than 50 were actually qualified. We knew we had a problem, and so we actually sought out a program that we partnered with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to develop utilizing supply chain techniques for talent. And so we adopted the program. We're the first state in the nation to have this program, Talent Pipeline Academy, and so we have trained about 30 people. In fact, we trained them up in Grand Rapids. And those community leaders now are going back to their individual communities, and about 200 companies have participated in identifying what are their workforce needs so that the educational institutions can actually design what their response and what their talent pipeline will be to fill those needs. So it's basic supply, demand. But before, organizations were guessing. And now they can actually have clear statistics about precisely what the workload demand or workforce demands will be in individual communities, in individual fields that are the majority of the businesses who are in that area.
Tonya, I want to talk to you about a very basic part of that education, but I want Suzanne to weigh in next because talent is key to whatever we do next. I mean, we have jobs unfilled today that people could be making a good living, but for, as Patti points out, they don't have the skills. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and you know, my main focus is infrastructure. This state has been woefully underfunded in the area of infrastructure. We cannot attract people or businesses that we need to come to Michigan. We have a consistent outmigration. In fact, that is a negative credit factor. And so we really need to focus on investment and aggressive investment to attract the right people and the right jobs.
And we have to have people ready for those jobs. And as we've seen, that becomes part of the problem. Tonya, you were talking in the green room about our rankings, and you were talking about where we were, where we are. So some of this being prepared starts at the very earliest levels. I mean, you only get one chance to be in 3rd grade, right?
Correct.
Right.
And we have to make sure we're performing there.
Right. So a few years ago, as a country, we talked about racing to the top in terms of K-12 education. Unfortunately, in Michigan, we've been racing to the bottom. So when you look at the statistics over the last 20 years, we went from the top quartile and now we're at the bottom quartile. We're at the last. And it's because we really do not have a educational system that puts students first, or even if it's a workforce development system, we don't put workforce development, adults first in the middle of these systems and make the systems accountable to delivering results for these kids or for the adults who we need to be in these jobs. And I think that one of the biggest challenges we're seeing is that we do not have coherent policy. All of our policy is piecemeal. And so as a result of that, we have this really fragmented system that tries to grab at the best practices of multiple models, and we're falling short. We're focusing on preparing our kids for tests rather than them having the crucial skills we know that they need to be successful in work. You want people who can collaborate, you want people who could be critical thinkers, you want young people who are creative innovators, people who have confidence, and who also know content. Content, in this case, is not king when it comes to having the kind of ingenuity that we're used to as a state, and also the ingenuity we are as Americans.
When you think about preparedness, if it's for an infrastructure job, if it's for any number of jobs, because you run the gambit, from folks who are doing very high-tech stuff to people who are working on the lines and keeping that power flowing. When you talk about that kind of training, Birgit, what do we need to do from your perspective to get people up to speed that maybe isn't a 4-year degree, but maybe it's a 2-year training program or an 18-month certificate program? I mean, how important is that to you as someone who tries to attract business to have that ability to
it's
get people
incredibly
up to speed?
important. It's the first conversation we have, and it's not just about attracting companies, it's about the ones we have. We announced 107 new jobs in Ionia yesterday. We've got to find those jobs somewhere. But I totally agree with Tonya. Our system is disparate. It's not systemic. We did an analysis in 7 counties. In West Michigan 4 years ago, we had over 300 workforce development, talent development programs and organizations, over 300 in just 7 counties. So it needs to be way more focused, way more coordinated, and it needs to start early with our youngest children, because if you're not prepared to go to school, you'll never succeed.
That's right.
You will never succeed. So the pipeline that has to come either in our colleges or into the skilled trades starts at age 1, not at age 15. And we are not coordinating this. Over the last 10 years, I think the legislature has changed its approach to our education system, 3 or 4 times, Tonya? And every time we don't like the outcomes, we do 180 and go the other direction and start over.
And
so
then
we've never done
the institutions or the teachers or the students.
Right. We don't give it a chance. So when I took this job 30 years ago, Michigan was number 5 in educational attainment. Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana were 48, 49, and 50, and we always giggled. And now we're turning into Mississippi.
Yes.
Is that acceptable to us? It should not be acceptable to anybody in this state to be at that low of an attainment level.
And Rick, can I just say, the other thing that I would just like to say about this is that we have a low unemployment rate in this state, but we have 850,000 open jobs for today. There is only one place we can go to fill those jobs. Well, there are 2 places. We can bring people in, or we can actually prepare the people that are here. And we are not spending enough time making the kind of investments that we'll need in order to get young people who might live in urban centers, young people who are living in rural centers. We're not spending the kind of effort we need on people that we have actually put in the justice system, who are coming out of prison, who may be interested in working and who have the skills, but we haven't invested in them. And this is the time to invest. Otherwise, we will be Mississippi. Well, we actually are Mississippi, but the running joke will be we don't want to be Michigan.
Well, that's a startling prospect.
I have a bright spot. Would you like to?
Yeah,
Please, Patti, help us.
Yes. So
I need that, or I need Chairman Boehner's Bloody Mary.
It would probably go better if we had one of those Bloody Marys.
Yeah, I think so. We had the opportunity to host the first Robotics World Championship in Detroit, and it is a bright spot that parallels our education system. It's a supplement to our education system, and Michigan leads in this area. We are #1 in the nation for high school robotics teams, part of the first program, and there's an 87% more higher likelihood that a student that's on one of those teams will pursue some sort of STEM career, whether it's skilled trades or engineering or IT or math. And so that is an area where we can build. We had 500 high school teams. 500 high school teams in Michigan. That's a place where we can build, and that actually has a K-12 curriculum that starts and can go all the way through. And so, for example, in Jackson County, as a result of the World Championship being in Detroit, we brought several Jackson County leaders to the World Championship. They had never seen it before, which is so amazing that we're #1 in the nation. There's still people who don't know about it. And we made a commitment that every middle school in Jackson County will have a first robotics team this fall. And it's things like that businesses partnering with our education system can truly make a difference. And we don't have to accept our ranking and our position. We have to just lead through it.
And I think another great point, is with all of that talent that you're seeing, how do we keep those young people here, right? We're constantly losing them to other places. But, do they want to, I was at a session yesterday, do they want to pay high auto insurance fees, as entry-level jobs in the city or in anywhere in the state? They're higher than most places. We don't have a regional transit system that young people really look for in our, top cities. And that is the most disappointing piece of our infrastructure, in my opinion, is that infrastructure is really a bipartisan issue. I mean, it's unfortunate things have been stalled at the federal level, and they're going to be stalled for a while. So it's really incumbent upon state and local officials to come together. There's one viable plan right now on the table, and there's already dissension. I mean, what is going on? We rank 24th out of 25th in terms of the average citizen using public transit among the 25 metropolitan areas. That's really sad, and Detroit is dead last. So we can't continue to rely just upon, the philanthropic community, and private companies came together to fund Q-Line. Let's take that momentum and expand it. Let's get something really going so people can have mobility around, Michigan and around the city. Seattle is an example that spends more on transit per capita than any other place, and people flooded to live in Seattle. And we see that in lots of other places.
Well, we do have, the governor had seated 2 commissions, one on infrastructure, so we have the blueprint. Tom Haas from GVSU chaired the commission on education. We have the blueprint. So now what do we do with it? Yeah. Okay, we have the blueprint for both.
Right.
We rallied around it. A lot of people spent a lot of their time last year, and I remember they brought it out right here on this stage. So what do we do with it? Is it going to sit on a shelf again? And for the next governor, we start another one of these commissions? Or are we actually going to take these plans and start implementing them, rally around them, and systemically do what needs to be done? Yeah. And infrastructure is water, sewer, roads, broadband. I've had 4 broadband studies in West Michigan alone, and I still can't get high-speed internet in Fremont.
Right. But Birgit,
so what are we doing here? I mean, are we really committed to this, or are we just keep doing a really good study?
Yeah, Birgit, I think you hit on the right thing, and I think Patti did as well. This is a time not for us to continue to diagnose our problems.
Exactly.
We haven't said one thing up here that most of us haven't heard. Like, we can make it sound sexier. We'd like to do that, right? More interesting.
If you can make infrastructure sexy.
We can do all that.
I might be able to do it.
We can do all of those things, but right now, what I think our state requires is a muscular civility in leadership. Right? So right now, if we really want to be prepared, our preparation comes from the leaders in our state deciding that we're not going to just rely on politicians or term-limited legislators to lead on issues that have a long-term span and implications for our citizens and for our economy. So this is the time for us to just lean in. And we have such brilliant leaders across our state, some that are leading in neighborhoods and others who are leading corporations. And it is time for us to pull people together to really drive an agenda that's going to get us to result and impact, and that we can measure. That's not just about like small metrics. Are people working or not? I care if people are working, but it is not as meaningful to me if we have a low unemployment rate and our wages are decreasing. I want a prosperous Michigan. And a prosperous Michigan means that we all get to have wage increases, our household incomes are going up, our profits and revenues are going up. We need that, and that includes investment in infrastructure, as everyone has said.
So there appears, please go ahead. There is obviously a unanimous idea that you need to make sure that those studies that go for education and infrastructure need to be pursued. You bring up a very interesting point. With term-limited legislators, and for that matter in the executive branch as well, it turns to other people who are perhaps more long-term invested in doing this, which I suspect is why I have you on this panel. So let's talk for just a minute about some of the things we do. I want to come back to education. We've been talking about preparedness for the workforce, and that's going to be something we'll continue with. But I want to talk specifically about infrastructure for a minute, because as Birgit laid out, that is a multifaceted idea. People say, infrastructure, oh, my roads. Well, yes, but. There's a lot more that goes through that. You work with that all the time, and two questions I want to ask you. First of all, anecdotally, pulling off of this conversation we just had, in those areas where people are doing big projects, infrastructure projects, are they able to find the kind of talent they need to pursue those projects? But more importantly, what should we be focusing on? Because there's a whole lot of stuff that's below my roads that is deteriorating too, and if that doesn't get fixed, it's going to be more serious than a pothole.
Yeah, well, we have what the American Society of Civil Engineers says is a $2 trillion funding gap in infrastructure over the next 8 years. And they rank the US at D+. They rank Michigan at D-. And a D category grade is poor and at risk, right? So we're really at risk now in our state. And the worst areas in Michigan are roads, drinking water, stormwater, and schools. Energy was a C-, I think. But what I think is should be the focus, I think Tonya's point is completely accurate, that the term limits and so much that needs to happen in our metropolitan area and urban centers are managed and really under control of outstate legislators. Is what other states do is they have more locally funded resources and options that are supported. We have so much of this done at the state level that some of our basic policies and laws probably need to change. We need a deep dive. There's a Transportation Rule Act 51 that will really require voter approval and constitutional amendment to change our core funding mechanisms on an underlying basis. And I just feel that we haven't grasped, we just haven't been as innovative. There are a few signs of hope. Gordie Howe Bridge was a P3 and the Detroit Freeway Lighting Project. But there are some fundamental things that we can do from a public policy perspective that will drive more private interest in investing in infrastructure in our state. And that's what's happening in New York, California, Florida, in not a robust way, because nowhere in America is private investment in infrastructure now robust. We're hoping for some policy changes. But I think it's coming. It's going to have to come, because our local governments are constrained with pension crisis, health care, et cetera. So we have to be a little more open. And we're not giving away the shop. We're talking about more design-build projects to be more, economically viable. So I think leadership is the key, policy changes, and a deep dive as to where legislatively we should be as a state.
Well, and energy can be a blueprint for that, though we're a C. We're not satisfied with mediocre. But energy actually does have a framework for natural gas and electricity. And I will say that right now we have the opportunity literally of a generation to transform our electric delivery system and our electric supply system. With the natural retirement, the aging of our existing coal-fueled power plants, we're retiring those. Consumers Energy has retired more than any other investor-owned utility, and we have the opportunity right now to replace that infrastructure with a modern, cleaner, and leaner energy delivery system. We're replacing it with actually more energy efficiency, demand response, use less products so we don't have to build more. So we have a blueprint that can show you can make the transformation, fund it through ongoing cost savings and a longer term point of view. And I think sometimes when we try and make an annual budget work without a long-term point of view, then you sub-optimize those investments. And so when we think about our electric supply system, in fact, on June 15th, we'll be publishing our 20-year energy supply plan. I think people are going to love it. It's clean, it's lean, no fossil fuels. It's going to be a transformation of our energy supply, and it can save customers money. The people of Michigan will have a leaner energy supply system because we're able to transform it right now, but only because we're thinking long term.
I want to go to you, Birgit, but before we move on, I want to point out the difference in the two. I appreciate that you are regulated as a utility. I understand that. Mm-hmm. But you still have the ability to make independent decisions about what you're going to do within the framework of the energy bill that was passed here in the state. So you can look at that and say, okay, well, here's the bill. We are a company. This is what we're going to do. And you point out that the constraints of PA 51, which is an act that talks about how money can be spent that comes through the transportation fund, that was passed in, interestingly enough, 1951. Right. Any bill that's older than I am should be looked at again. just a rule of thumb. So it's really a different paradigm because you have the latitude to make decisions based on your investments. We don't have
latitude to let prices just be whatever they're
going to be. You have constraints, I understand.
So I guess the point I'm making is because we're thinking long term and because we're looking holistically at the system, we actually can reduce the cost of the system. To spend, to invest can actually reduce the total cost in the long run. There's a net present value that's positive.
And isn't that a great model that we wish we could incorporate?
But she can still be long-term, right?
Right.
Yeah.
This transcends 3 legislative, 6-year terms for a House member, right? So we're talking 20 years. They're looking out 20 years. We don't do that in Lansing anymore. It's 6-year cycles, and by the time the last 2 years happen, you're already into the next cycle. So how do we as a state then think long-term and institute things that survive elections, right? Because the worst thing that's going to happen next year, my fear is, we're going to do 180 and go in the opposite direction, and everything we've built on in the last 8 years, and let's be positive, because we are in a different place than we were 10 years ago, in a much better place. What we have to do is build on it. But I'm afraid that we're going to go, oh, we all decided we're going to New York. Nope, we're going to go to LA. She doesn't have to do that, because Patti is the CEO and she can think out 20 years. We need to do this as a state and not keep changing and, oh, we like blue today, no, we like red tomorrow, and we keep changing. And so we are not consistent. And if business hates one thing, it's inconsistency and undependability in terms of, because they have to make decisions of where they're going to go, and is that state going to be with me over the long haul, or are they going to go in 2 years and change their minds? And that's something that Michigan has unfortunately been known for. Yep, they're going to do 180 the minute the elections happen, and we're here and we don't know how we're going to make this decision. Companies want consistency and dependability and predictability. They need to take risk out of their decision making. If we keep changing this, whether it's on education, on our infrastructure, it's going to be harder. That's just how it's been. And we have kind of a reputation in the site consultant community that, well, let's just wait till the next election happens in Michigan and see what happens and how they change their minds on economic development. That's not good.
The problem that exists to some degree is the current legislature can't bind a future legislature on many of these spending items. And so the way to get a longer term program would have to be done by some type of initiative, perhaps. And so as we talk about being prepared, would any of you look at those reports and say, maybe we, the citizens, need to look at trying to put those forward so there is a longer term, more consistent, more predictable future? In education, for example, is there a blueprint out there that says, if we do this and if we stick with this, then we can achieve that preparedness, we can achieve the need for skilled workers, and we can achieve some of the benefits that come from that, because not only would you have the ability to know what was going to happen, you would have a better ability to know what it would cost.
Right. Well, I would say I agree with Birgit's point about the commissions that the governor put together. I think the education plan is a very solid plan with very specific, measurable things that we need to do, the direction that we need to go in. And I believe that the work that the business leaders of Michigan and others are doing around education is right where we need to be. And not because I believe that they have the solution. There is no one who has the silver bullet on this issue. But what they are pushing for, which I think is right on, is that we are not going to move forward unless there is deep buy-in across our entire state. There has to be deep buy-in from the business community. There has to be deep buy-in from parents. There needs to be deep buy-in from our educators, where they feel like their voices are heard. If we get that deep level of buy-in, then I think we can figure out what we need to do. I often use this simple equation of 70-20-10, meaning that if you're working on an issue, even if you disagree, 70% of what you are going to work on, you can find agreement. Now, there's a 20% that you won't, but you may be able to negotiate, and then there's a 10% that you will never agree on. And I think the challenge we have in our state is that we start with 10% and we never move forward. I say, let's start with the 70 and see if we can make our way to 80, right? Exactly.
Preparedness is about perception, and I'm not going to repeat the name of the state that some of you have used up here because that makes me nervous. I like Michigan better. But being prepared and having a good reputation includes all of the things you've just discussed, but it also includes some other things about being inclusive. We were talking about social justice, criminal justice, and some of those things that we start at 10%.
Right.
That's where we start that conversation. How important is it, being prepared going forward, that we are seen, not as a perception, as a reality of being an inclusive state where people can come and be welcomed and be a part of what we hope is a thriving economy? I'm going to start with you, Suzanne.
Well, I think infrastructure is all about being inclusive. It's providing access to all citizens, how they move around, whether they can drink safe water. I mean, it's all about inclusivity. And I think that, our failures in, various areas, primarily to me now, regional transit in our area reeks of lack of desire to be inclusive.
Yeah, there is no doubt. Our company, as the leader of my company, I have the privilege of being all over the state of Michigan. We serve all the lower peninsula counties. And so as I travel the state and I then travel the world, attracting investment for the infrastructure that we've been describing, there's no doubt that communities and environments that come together are stronger and are better. And so as we look at this transition, I think, Birgit, you've made a really important point that as we go into the election season this fall, making sure that we together stand and know that together we are better. And that means a diversity, equity, and inclusion where across the board voices are valued, heard, and I love the focus on the 70. I think that the people who are here at this conference are here for a reason, because you're standing for making Michigan an extraordinary place. And I think that we need to, and it's feeling a little bit like a to-do item, I don't know, but it feels like one's emerging, Ray, from this committee. But that there's a commitment to build from where we are, build on the momentum, and not reset just because we've had elections. There's too much progress that's been made, and we've got some great candidates. There's going to be a great debate this afternoon, but the reality is we, the citizens, the leaders in Michigan, can stand for momentum and not a reset.
You know, I don't have any part of that debate, but maybe some of those fine folks that will be moderating would ask if those candidates would commit to building on the things that they see that have been done positively. They're not going to agree with all of them, but it would be interesting to know where they stand on that.
Particularly these two studies on education and infrastructure. You don't have to reassess the problem. We have to talk about now, what are we going to do to solve the problem? And I think that would be very interesting to hear this afternoon.
Just as a suggestion.
Yeah.
Birgit, talking about the inclusive part, how do people see Michigan when you're looking at people coming in? Are we welcoming, inviting? Are we open and inclusive?
Not as much as we should be. You know, and I'm going to just speak about West Michigan. And you know, I've in this job for 30 years. I'm very proud of what we have accomplished. There are a lot of my partners in the room from higher education and the business community, and we've done a lot. You know, Grand Rapids is on every top list. But there is one list that we are way, way low on, and that is on inclusion and the ability of people of color to succeed. And that's just plain, that is not acceptable. To me, this is a huge economic development issue. Why would we not value everybody's brain who wants to work in our state? It's all about gray matter. Color doesn't matter. I like to say the only color that matters is the matter of your brain, which is gray. Everything else is irrelevant. And so we need to do way more in becoming a much more welcoming state. Now, everybody talks about diversity, but in Grand Rapids Public Schools, over 50 languages are spoken. That's pretty diverse. But are we including those children? Are we including their parents? That's more than diversity. That's more than diversity. That, to me, it's like this wonderful, we have these strands of yarn, red, blue, pink, gray, whatever, but we never weave a rug. Until we have that rug, we need to do way more than that. Now, the mayor of Grand Rapids, and I know if Bill Pink is in the room, they're co-chairing a commission in Grand Rapids on this very subject. I'm a part of it. It has to be everybody engaged in this issue. If we cannot attract the kind of talent of various hues, whether they're immigrants or whether they want to come from another part of the United States, we will not have the reputation we need. It's personal and it's an economic development issue.
I would say, you know, I like this definition that diversity is when you count the people, inclusion is when the people count. And so we have to make sure that we are actually looking at whether or not people are valued, whether or not people are described by their aspirations versus whether people are described by their deficits. And I would just say a couple of things. One is that we know that talent is distributed equally. And when I say that, I mean it really is. Like in every neighborhood, in every zip code, and even in prisons, there is talent there. Now what we don't have is opportunity distributed equally. And I think our agenda as a state has to be about how we distribute it. We need an opportunity agenda for all people and looking at them personalizing the work that needs to happen. I would also just say, when I think about diversity and inclusion, I'm also thinking about equity. How do we give people who are starting far behind the starting line a head start? How do we get them up a little bit so that they can actually have a fair shot? Now, I've talked a little bit about criminal justice and or prison reform, but I haven't really said it. I just want to give you context on this. In our state, in 1980, we spent 2% on criminal justice. Today, 20% of our budget goes towards it. We require every person that gets a sentence to actually spend 85%. They have to serve 85% of that time. When they get out of jail, we say to them, you can't have a benefit. So we're going to make sure that we spend $50,000 of a year to cage you. But when you get out of jail, we won't give you $1,200 in food stamps to prevent you from going back to jail so we can stop spending $50,000. And I'm gonna say just one other thing about it. I have a good friend who works on this issue, and he gave a little task or a challenge to a group of MIT students. And he said, look, I'm gonna give you these 4 little products, and I want you to make a stove out of them, and I want you to make a communication tool out of it. And they were like, we can't do this. They worked on it all day. And they were like, who could do this? And they were like, well, the guys in prison, they ain't got nothing to do. And they have figured out how to take like an ink pen, like a MacGyver strategy to turn it. And so the point I'm making is like, we have engineers that are sitting there. We have all of these brilliant people that are there who didn't have opportunities. And I know they made a bad decision, but just like all of us, I'm not going to tell you my worst decision. I don't want you to judge me by it, and I don't want us to judge them by it. We have to figure out how to make an inclusive society where when they come back home, that they actually can contribute and not just be judged by that. And that goes for our young people. It goes for people who are in rural areas as well.
All right. In 5 minutes, I'm going to ask each of you to come up with a very uplifting takeaway, because you guys are making me a little sad. Okay?
Don't be sad. Look at who's on this panel. We got this.
That's good. We're there. But before we do, I want to start with you and speak of anything that I haven't brought up or that we haven't discussed that you think we need as a state, not as a takeaway, but a subject of preparedness that we might not have talked about, if there is one.
I want to piggyback on something that was said about the 21st Century Infrastructure Commission report, because one area that the state has led in is putting together an asset identification program so that we can begin. It's a first step, but I think the state is the first to do so in the country. It's something that we've been pushing for on this bipartisan council for infrastructure. But to actually, if you don't know what you have as a municipality, how can you really effectively manage it? And so we are a little bit on the forefront of starting a process of this pilot program to identify our assets. Now the question is, what is the next step? There's no incentive for, Pontiac or even Grand Rapids or any municipality to initiate their own programs and to get any extra funding or extra benefits. So there's a lot that could be done with that. So I think with the glimmers of hope that we have, we really need to, jump on the bandwagon and try to take it to the next level. And that would be my hope, because I do think that with the tremendous funding gap that we have, somebody's got to pay for it. We don't want, and there are going to be additional costs to individuals. I think we need to focus a lot more on voter education with, unfortunately, the tragedies that we've had in Flint and sinkholes and the like. Voters are very interested in this issue and have ranked it very high, so we're going to all have to pay more. But I think, my hope is that we can do it in a consistent and orderly fashion so there are economies of scale in doing so.
Patti, is there something we haven't talked about that we should be talking about?
I think this idea of coming together just could be reiterated. There's a little study about a group of kindergartners, a group of CEOs, a group of lawyers, and a group of MBAs who are all given the same task: to build the highest tower out of spaghetti and marshmallows. Now, I'd like to offer to the group, which group do you think won?
The kids.
I'm happy to report the CEOs came in second, which I'm very proud of my family. But the kindergartners won because they were not trying to one-up each other. Mm-hmm. They stood shoulder to shoulder and let the best idea hit the table. They had fun while they were making something happen together. And I do think that for Michigan to continue to win and continue to have the momentum, that if we stand shoulder to shoulder and work together, there's nothing that the ingenuity and the people of this great state can't do. And so I just think we have to believe in each other, believe in the possibility of extraordinary things continuing to happen here, and just push through the momentum of it's what's going to be, I think, a busy and potentially contentious election season, because that's what happens. I think the attendees of this conference have to stand shoulder to shoulder to make sure that we don't lose momentum during this time.
What do we need to bring to the forefront? Before we come back in just a minute, we're going to come up with some really positive takeaways, not to-do list, but the takeaways from where we go. Is there anything we missed that we should have been told?
Well, we talked a lot about skilled trades, and the program that Patti had, mentioned that Consumers is doing is great. But here's something that whenever we get into this pinch with talent, and we've been there before, actually I wrote an article in 1998 on the availability of skilled trades jobs. That's 20 years ago. But what we have to do, and this isn't easy, it's a cultural shift in our mind. And this is not about going to college or being in the skilled trades. It's not an either-or proposition. It's a this and a proposition. But people talk about the skilled trades now and apprenticeships and how did Germany do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What we all have to accept and shift in our minds is give the electrician who comes and wires your home the same respect you do somebody with a college education. Because it takes that electrician just as long to become a certified electrician as it takes somebody to get a philosophy degree, okay? So when your son or daughter comes home and says, I don't want to go to college because I want to learn with my hands, be as proud of that as if they were to say, I'm going to X university. Mm-hmm. And that today is missing. It's missing in our teachers who don't encourage children to look at other kinds of opportunities. It's missing in parents who don't want to say, oh, my daughter is apprenticing at whatever company and, to become a tool and die maker. To me, that is a cultural shift in our mind that one is valued as much as the other.
All right, that already sounds like a takeaway. Tonya, let's talk about what we want to be prepared for. What do we take away from this panel?
Well, I would say two things. The first thing I believe that we should be a takeaway is that we are more than enough. As a state, as leaders, we can deal with these issues. We don't need to go back and redefine the problems. What we need to be doing is spending our time mobilizing around solutions, and that our solutions ought to be measured on whether or not they have impact on our citizenry. Whether or not our citizens, our workers are doing well, whether or not their families are doing well, whether or not we're preparing young people to get into work and to get into work. Last thing I would just say about it is I am in love with this Indian proverb which says essentially that our responsibility, because we're borrowing this time from our children, is to be good stewards. And that's what we need to do. The takeaway is this is our time for stewardship. This is our time for investment.
Suzanne?
I have three. I'll be quick. Let's think about infrastructure, not just fixing and repairing. Let's think about it in terms of our competitiveness. We're on the forefront of autonomous vehicles, but we don't have roads that we can put those vehicles on, or the broadband across the state to support them. Two, let's continue to focus on our urban centers. The Brookings Institute did a study that over 75% of GDP, patent activity, R&D jobs, venture capital funding occurs in our urban centers. If we support Detroit, we support our state. And three, vote infrastructure. Vote for those that you think will support a robust infrastructure plan.
Patti?
One thing I would just love to leave the audience with is the Consumers Energy team has a very strong commitment to what we refer to as our triple bottom line, and I think it applies to the state as well. We believe that a company has to stand for more than just profits. We think that, and we stand for serving people, the planet, and prosperity, and that our company is all in for Michigan. We only succeed as a company when Michigan is winning. And so I would just want everyone in the audience to know, on behalf of my coworkers, we are working every single day to make sure that Michigan is prepared with vital infrastructure of natural gas and electricity. We don't want you to worry about it because we do the worrying for you. but we're on the job, and we really stand by our triple bottom line.
Birgit?
Well, I've been in this job now for 30 years. I want to point out I was 18 when I started it. But so to leave on a positive note, there has a lot of positive changes come to the state. We cannot just look at the glass as half empty. I prefer to look at it as half full. We have come a long way. Our standing in this country in terms of what we represent today is different than it was when I started in this job, and way different than it was 10 years ago. But let's take that momentum and continue forward with infrastructure investment, with the kind of things that Patti's talking about, with taking the talent that we have, and really continue moving forward. So when someone comes to you and says, I'm going to do this, this, and this next year when they're running for office, ask them about these issues. How well are they informed about these issues? And where do they stand on these issues? And if they don't stand with us in this room, then do they deserve your vote? That's your question.
So that brings this panel to an end, and while I don't think on the program it said I got a takeaway, here is mine. As long as we have leaders like this who are willing to talk candidly in a forum like this about the important issues going forward, and as long as they hold the feet to the fire of the elected officials who need to also respond to those needs and those reports, then I think we've got a pretty bright future here in Michigan. I'm delighted to be with all of you. Ladies, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick.